Hello everybody. Today I'm doing something a little bit different for you. We're going to talk about repairing an antique quilt. So this glorious beauty of incredible craftsmanship was given to me by my brother. Now before he gave it to me, he washed it and he dried it in the dryer. This quilt is very old. I don't know the exact age, but judging by some of the materials or the fabrics and the designs used in the fabrics, I'm thinking 40s. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert, but I do know that it is old. That's the back of the quilt there. Now, when he did this, some of this fabric, which is in varying degrees of quality, some of this fabric, when he washed and dried this, some of this fabric just kind of gave out. You can see here, particularly this solid red. This is what we're looking at. It's very obvious because underneath of it is a white backing. Now, if you look, this is happening multiple times, particularly to this inner circle. But I also want to bring your attention to this. Okay? To the left of this patch here that has the hole, this is a repair job, a previous repair job. And actually, so is this. Now, you can see there is a slight color difference, but all in all, it looks pretty good. And how this repair was done was a piece was cut a little bit larger than the original piece. It was then, the ends were ironed under, and then it was then stitched onto the top, hand stitched onto the top of the quilt, kind of like an applique-ish idea, with a red thread. That is my intent, to bring this back to life yet again. I don't ever intend on using this on a bed, though I think it would be gorgeous, but I just don't think it has that left in it. I'm going to hang this on the wall. I have a wall that is damaged. The previous owner had a TV mounted there, and I think this would cover that well. You can see here in the background fabric, there's another tear. That I'm just going to hand stitch. This quilt was hand quilted. Let me see if we can show you here. And that's hand quilting. These little white. So we're going to fix it back up. I started my quest yesterday looking for a red that would match. And I did find something. Now, it's not identical, but it's going to work. This is just a quarter of a yard of fabric. It cost me like $1.30 something. So we're going to use that to cut our pieces. Now, when you're doing repairs to antique quilts and vintage quilts, in order to maintain their value as an antique item, you're supposed to use antique or vintage fabric. But truth be told, I'm not worried about this quilt maintaining its value. I'm worried about it maintaining its beauty, and I just want to enjoy it for the beautiful piece of craftsmanship that it is, and I want to hang it on my wall. So I don't, in this instance, particularly care if this is fabric from nowadays and this is fabric from a long time ago. But some people might. So this is the fabric we're going to use. Now the next step in this is we have to determine what size pieces we're going to cut. So I have a tape measure here. And I think the color scheme of this is just gorgeous. I love it. Okay. So we've got a diamond type of shape. And these are small pieces. Okay, about a 1.5 inch. By 1.5. Okay. So I'm going to cut my pieces approximately, we're going to go for 1 3/4 and see how that works with folding under. I would like to have a little extra to fold under, but I don't want things to get too bulky. Yeah, I'm contemplating here. We'll come back to that. But now when I was out shopping for this fabric, that matched, and like I said, close, not perfect. I was so consumed with finding the right fabric that I forgot to pick up a spool of thread that matched. Because though I'm going to hand stitch this very carefully, there are going to be small areas where you're going to see a little bit of the thread. And so I want it to be this red color to just kind of help it be not obvious, like this repair. That repair looks great. And unless you look very carefully at this quilt, or it's pointed out to you, I don't think that you would just notice it. So we have to see if I have something in my collection that comes close to this. I'm up here in my attic with my sewing stuff here at my new house. I don't have a designated area yet. My old house I did, but here I just haven't quite figured that out. But it looks like I have a lot of reds that could work. We're looking for a cotton because this quilt is made with cotton fabric, and it's best to use a thread. Now that is the same as the fabric. Now this is polyester, so we don't want that one. Huh. That's a stretch. We don't want that. For sure, this doesn't have a label, but this it's got a cotton feel. And here's my fabric. Look at that. That's pretty darn close. We'll use this one. First thing I'm going to do here before I do any cutting is I'm going to iron my fabric with some spray starch. This is just from Walmart. This is the lavender scent, which I kind of enjoy. There are other brands you can get at quilt shops and things. You don't need to use very much, a very small amount. And if you've never used spray starch with quilting for piecing small pieces, I highly recommend you try it. It just helps the fabric and keeps it from getting wonky. Just gives it a little more stability when you're stitching it and you're trying to keep it the way you want it, and it really makes piecing a lot nicer. So I'm just going to lightly spritz my fabric here, and you'll get a feel for how much starch you like to use. I use a little spritz on both sides, and then I take my iron, no steam, just hot iron, and iron it. It also helps to get some of the wrinkles out, just because it gets a little wet. You don't want to use a ton of spray starch, as it can leave marks because it is a starch. You know? It just makes cutting so much nicer, and you can see there's just a little bit of firmness to it now. I'm just going to finish up my piece, iron it, and then we will talk more about cutting. I ended up deciding on a 1/2 inch seam allowance per se to fold under for my pieces. Now, this was a 45-degree angle diamond or triangle-y shape that I was using on my quilt. Whatever you're repairing or replacing, you're going to have to figure out what size piece you need. You can make a template, you know, and then add some extra to fold under. But if you can see here, I have my piece laying here. I think it blends in pretty nicely. Okay, and you can see the back, my fold under. And then I'm going to carefully hand stitch them on once I get all these pressed. I starched this heavily, so it's not going to flop around. It's going to hold nice and steady for me while I hand stitch it on. Well, it is time to finish up the repairs on this quilt and actually hand stitch on the pieces. Now here, in this little shot here, there are quite a few spots that have been replaced with the replacement fabric. Some of them are previous repairs and some of them are ones I've done. This one here, I stitched on. I think it looks pretty good. You can tell the fabric's a little crisper. Of course it is starched and it just doesn't have the wear. But I think the match is pretty good. So I'm going to show you how I'm doing this. Here is a previous repair done by someone else. You know, I'm going to be using a ladder stitch. Let me just find a nice tattered up. Aha. Here's one. You don't have to look too far. Here's the one we're going to work on. That one with that big white hole. You can see others are threadbare as well. We're going to just replace the worst ones. Really, all of this red is on the verge of falling apart, but we're going to replace the worst ones. So I'm going to use a ladder stitch. So the first thing you want to do is thread up your needle with a double strand of thread. So that means you're going to loop it through and you're going to knot it at the bottom. So I have inserted my needle through the flap that I've folded over, and I'm just going to pull it through to secure my knot there underneath of the fold of fabric. I have my needle coming out on this front facing little ledge here. Okay, so here's the positioning idea. Here's the thread coming out right on the very edge. Okay, so now we position this right over here. I'm gonna set it aside for a minute to show you what exactly we're gonna do here. Now if you see in this crease, we have the white stitches, which are quilting stitches, and we have the actual seam. So what we're going to do, we're going to go in with our needle into this seam, the side of the seam. We're going to go up a little bit, probably about between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. We're going to emerge with our needle. Then we're going to come in back on this edge of this piece that we're patching at approximately the same distance. Okay, and we're going to go up a little bit and come out and go in on this piece. Now this is going to create little strings going across that we can visibly see, and it's going to have a ladder appearance, and that is why this is called the ladder stitch. It can also be called a mattress stitch, but this is great for taking two seams and making an invisible stitch. It's a very easy stitch. It doesn't require any real skill. It just takes a little patience and a little time. So let me set that up like I just demonstrated to you with the pen so you can visually see. Okay, now here you can see those rungs that I was talking about of the ladder. So I came out from my knot, it's hidden in there. I went across, I went in and up a little, back across at approximately the same dimension. And again, now this is why we use a double strand of thread, because we are going to pull this now. You can't go, I don't recommend doing more than, 2 or 3 stitches and then pulling it taut. because it does put unnecessary strain on the fabric and on the thread. And let me tell you, when the thread breaks, it's kind of a bummer. So I'm just gonna give this a little pull here. Now I have to be extra delicate because my fabric, some of my fabric, my old fabric here is, like I said, threadbare. But you see, that looks pretty good. And now I'm just going to continue up and around to finish securing this piece. Okay, so far so good. I think it's, you know, nicely concealed. Now here we're to a corner, and I thought maybe I would just talk to you about the corner because perhaps it's a little more concerning than just a straight line. And I don't know what kind of shape you might have on your repair job. So our thread's coming out over here in our original fabric. We're going to go in approximately here on our new fabric and come out right at the corner. And then we're going to just kind of secure it, continuing with our ladder stitch right here. And you can see right below there is my fabric. We're just going to continue on. Okay, I've made it a little more than halfway around. I'm probably 3/4 of the way around. And I wanted to mention that you could use an embroidery hoop and place it where you're working to kind of stabilize the fabric and give you something to hold on to. But because this red that is all around me is so weak, and I'm just afraid to put any type of pressure on it or strain on it. And when you do put something in an embroidery hoop, you want it snug. So I'm not doing that. If your quilt is in good condition or better condition than this, the rest of the fabric on this quilt I think could handle that, but the red cannot, and that's the area I'm working. That would be something that would be beneficial to help you out. If you had a quilt, like an old-fashioned quilt rack for quilting a quilt, that would be an ideal place or way to work on it. But I don't have one of those. And a final thing I want to mention is that as I'm making my stitches onto the original quilt, I'm being careful to not go all the way through. My needle is not coming out underneath. I'm just skimming this fabric here because I don't want it to be visible on the back of the quilt. Now, if you're going to just display the front of the quilt like I am, I guess the back doesn't really matter. But that's the main idea, is that this is supposed to be an invisible stitch and that you do not see it, okay? I have now secured my piece the entire way around, and what I'm going to do is just kind of insert it a little bit into my seam, pull it back through, and then I'm going to insert into that loop just to make a knot, a small knot. Okay. And then I'm going to take this in and underneath, pull it out of my repair job, and I'm going to nip that so that way we don't have to worry. I'm going to just pull it a little tautly so that way it's a little, and just kind of vanish. Okay, so one done. I'm going to continue to work around and repair these red pieces. I've got 16 that I'm going to repair, and then we will be ready to mount this beauty. So today my rack or holder or mounting system for my quilt arrived from Amazon, and I will link that in the description. So if you're interested, you could get one of these. They come in different sizes, different colors, and they do not damage your quilt whatsoever. So these knobs here are the tightening mechanism. Your quilt goes in between these two pieces of wood, and there's kind of a gap for the binding, which is like the thicker edge of your quilt. And then you just tighten these up, and it holds the quilt with a type of compression. And then the board is mounted on your wall. So your beautiful heirloom, or you know, your piece of artwork is not damaged, and you can actually fairly easily swap out quilts if you want to change them. These are available in small sizes and big sizes. So here we are. It's finally up. It's finally completed. This is a very small room, so I'm having trouble getting back far enough to get it all in. But this is just where we watch TV or play video games. It's just a small little bedroom on our first floor. The hanger for the quilt worked wonderfully. My husband was very pleased that the mechanisms for screwing it into the wall were exactly 16" on center apart, so it worked perfectly with the studs. And then we hung the quilt and then mounted it up there after we had the screws in. I did become aware that the quilt is quite wonky. When I measured it, I didn't really pay attention to it being square or not, but it's not square. But you know what? That's okay with me. It's still beautiful. And my repairs, I'm very pleased with. No white spots poking through that red anymore. And I hope to get several more years enjoyment out of this quilt. So if you enjoyed this video, please check out my others. Talk to y'all later.